Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining the podcast of the North-South Dialogue Project. I'm Deepali from the Doing Sociology team. This podcast is produced by the collaborative work of the International Policy Institute of the University of Washington and Doing Sociology in India. We're very happy to have with us today Mansi Pandey, who is currently doing her MPhil at the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi, India. And her research interests fall under the field of inclusive education, specifically rights of students with disability, as well as quality of early childhood care and education. Very happy to have you with us today, Mansi.
Hi, Deepali. Thank you very much for having me here.
Mansi, firstly, to begin with, could you tell us a little bit about your research?
Absolutely, yes. Hi everyone, to all the listeners as well. My name is Mansi, and I am currently pursuing my MPhil Ph.D. program from NEPA, New Delhi. And to just give a little brief about my academic background, I have done my bachelor's in sociology from Lady Shri Ram College for Women. And I did my post-graduation also in sociology from Ambedkar University, Delhi. For a brief period, I've also worked with the National Council of Educational Research and Training, which is NCERT in New Delhi, as a junior project fellow on the research project on inclusive education, where I traveled to various states and interacted with state level coordinators, block level coordinators, teachers, and discussed on the entire idea of inclusive education, which was my first kind of exposure to the whole idea of research and field work. Currently, as part of my MPhil research project and my dissertation, I'm working on the title Strategic Human Resource Management and Quality of Early Childhood Care and Education in Delhi. To begin with, the idea of early childhood care and education, globally, it has been acknowledged that this phase, this period from 0 to 6 years, as defined by various international and national organizations, or 0 to 8 years, as defined by UNICEF, is a very crucial stage in a child's life, because as medical researches also indicate, that this is the period where the child's brain develops the fastest, and they adapt a lot of competencies like social skills, physical growth, language competencies, numeric competencies, etc. during this particular phase. So it's very important that all children across the globe have access to quality early childhood care and education. What is the meaning of quality? Now, quality doesn't have a universal or a single definition. It depends on the context of a particular nation. It depends on the cultural beliefs, the economic development, the resource availability of a particular nation or a state. However, there are various international organizations like UNICEF, World Bank, OECD, and even our own national policies and frameworks like the National ECCA Policy 2013 and National Curriculum Framework, which do define quality standards. And there are certain commonalities between all of these kind of organizations and national policies. So just to briefly tell you that, there are certain common factors which are recognized globally as important under quality, like having good infrastructure, having a balanced pupil-teacher ratio, having access to drinking water, toilet facilities separate for girls and boys, also for children with disabilities, then having a good supportive work culture for teachers, having capacity building opportunities and trainings for teachers, other aspects like having a good positive interaction between teachers and students, teachers and parents, community integration, etc. But to achieve these quality standards, it has also been recognized that it is very important to invest in the most important component in the early childhood care and education structure, which is the teachers. Because education is a labor-intensive industry where teachers form the backbone of it. So educational institutes must invest heavily in their teachers, starting from their recruitment, starting from their to their growth, to their training opportunities, to their incentive opportunities, their promotion opportunities, appraisal opportunities, transfer opportunities, etc. All of these must be heavily invested in by educational institutions. And when we talk about early childhood care and education, children spend the most amount of time with these teachers. So what is the quality of teaching learning, how quality standards can be achieved, is directly proportional to how the teachers are doing, whether they are motivated enough, whether they are trained enough, where they are rewarded enough, incentivized enough, heard enough, right? So my topic looks at how these two are connected, looks at how strategic human resource management practices such as staffing, such as continuous professional development, rewards, evaluation, all of these lead to quality early childhood care and education. So in this research, I aim to examine the current I have examined the current practices, the current the status of SHRM, which is Strategic Human Resource Management Practices, in three kinds of ECC service providers in South Delhi. So I have looked at the Anganwadi system, I have looked at the Delhi government schools, and I have looked at the NCD schools. And I have seen what are the kind of practices they follow, how it's related to the quality of early childhood care, and I've also seen what are the kind of current challenges that are faced by these institutes. So that's basically a small introduction of what I'm looking at through my research.
Right, that's extremely interesting, Mansi, your topic. Since you've just talked about how you've sort of done your fieldwork in South Delhi, three different kinds of schools. So what I'm interested to know is, was there, a reason why you chose these three different categories? And then does that also sort of, since you're done with your fieldwork, could you also find differences in terms of, strategic human resource management in these three types of institutes, as well as then again, early childhood care and education?
Yes, absolutely. So because of there was basically convenience sampling that was used primarily for this research, because of also the paucity of time. And in India currently, if you look at Indian ECC structure, there are three kinds of service. There are three kinds of service providers: private, public, and non-governmental. Within which comes various models like Anganwadi, the government schools, pre-primary sections in government schools, private schools, NGOs, home-based education, etc. So because of the paucity of time, and also looking at the kind of current COVID challenges also, we kept it to three kind of categories: two pre-primary sections of government schools and one Anganwadi system. Also, just let me tell you that ECC in India, as well as in many other countries, is looked at is a very diverse kind of and very dynamic kind of structure, because in India there are three ministries which take care of early childhood care and education: Ministry of Education, Ministry of Women and Child Development, and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So there are three kinds of different ministries also involved, because the whole structure of ECC also includes health and aspects of nutrition, health, protection, etc. So coming back to my research, I looked at 30 schools in total, 10 each from these three categories. And yes, there were evident differences. Also, because South Delhi is primarily, I looked at the more urban settings, still going under semi-rural urban areas, but majorly looking at the urban settings, there were differences that I found within these three categories of schools providing pre-primary education to children. Just to briefly tell you, I looked at three kinds of category of information and data. So when I looked at the facility bit of it, then I saw that in MCD schools, Municipal Corporation of Delhi schools, facilities like ramp, drinking water, open space, hand wash, separate toilet for girls and boys, um, height, chairs and seats according to the height of children, all of them were available. They were present. However, there were few schools where furnitures were lacking, where kids were sitting, were supposed to sit on durries and mats. They did not have seats and chairs. Also, in some schools, there was lack of open space. When in comparison, when I look at to Sarvodaya Vidyalaya schools, which come under the Delhi government schools, they had better facilities. They had well-heighted chair according to the height of kids in their classrooms. They had ramp, water, drinking facilities, separate toilet for girls and boys, library within the classroom. So they had better facilities in that sense. Whereas when we compare both of them to the Anganwadi structure, which comes under Ministry of Women and Child Development, there were a lot of challenges which I saw, like these rooms were in very bad condition. There were some rooms which are at a very dingy location. They did not have proper ventilation. They were suffocating, and there was no ramp. There was no ramp in any of the Anganwadi centers where I went. There was one common washroom maybe, and no separate washroom for girls and boys. And also again, there was no furniture. There was only mats and durries, which were also sometimes torn. um, no chair and table for the teachers as well in these Anganwadi centers. So in terms of facilities bit, I saw that Sarvodaya schools were doing much better as compared to the other two. When I talk about the strategic human resource management practices like teacher recruitment, um, all of them followed government norms. All of them were following government norms, and they had whoever was a primary teacher in these centers had those kind of certain qualifications, etc. But the problem in MCD schools, which I found, was that there were many schools where there was no pre-primary teacher. There was no appointment of a pre-primary teacher, and primary teachers or even in fact principals were taking classes for these children. The problem here is that these teachers and these principals are not trained in nursery training. They do not have a diploma or a certificate in early childhood care and education, which is required of a pre-primary teacher. So that is where the challenge was seen. Whereas in Sarvodaya schools, most of the schools had pre-primary teachers, and they also had the adequate qualifications which is required. In Anganwadi, surprisingly, if when we talk about qualification and recruitment, many of the workers who teach the kids were overqualified, because the minimum education level which is required is 12th standard. But most of them were bachelors. Some of them even had a post-graduation degree. However, some of them were not trained in nursery training, so which was also a gap that I saw there. Then, when we talk about the teacher training, then if we talk about teacher training, then MCD schools and Sarvodaya schools were kind of similar in that sense, because they are given trainings almost 2-3 times a year, or when required on ECCE by diet or SCERT. Whereas in Anganwadi, what I saw is that in terms of training, there was variation in the responses. Few Anganwadi helpers or the workers said that, like there was this one worker who said that she has attended only 2 to 3 trainings in 12 to 13 years of her working experience. However, there were some Anganwadi workers who said that they continuously keep on refresher courses keep on happening. So there was this diverse opinions of workers which I saw about training in Anganwadi system. Coming to the third factor of strategic human resource management, which is the reward system, there was a general disappointment that was seen across all 3 categories. There was a general disappointment seen among teachers that pre-primary teachers are not really given a lot of importance. They're not given a lot of awards or rewards, or not acknowledged as much. And in Sarvodaya schools as well, which are doing much better as compared to other categories, they also said that they felt that they're not recognized enough, they're not rewarded enough. And Anganwadis, again, they said that they don't remember the last time an award system happened. Out of the 10 Anganwadi workers that I interviewed, only one of them had won an award. That was also back in 2014. So there was a general disappointment with respect to rewards. And the last factor which I looked at was the teacher evaluation. So in that, I think it was all three of them were doing good in terms of that there was regular kind of supervision, there was regular observation of classes which was done in MCD and Sarvodaya. If we talk about, then principals used to they regularly visit the classrooms, primary in charges regularly visit, and even external officers also regularly visit schools for observations. And in Anganwadi also, the supervisors and the CDPOs, they come often to see, and the criteria are also similar. Like they look at how teachers are conducting themselves in the classroom, whether teachers are coming also or not, whether the students are coming into classrooms or not, how is the teacher teaching them, are they using playway methods? Because in early childhood care and education, formal teaching is not encouraged. It is always encouraged that teachers should use playway methods, right? So they also check how whether teachers are using playway methods where activities are conducted for various subjects or not. So these were the kind of comparisons that I could gather from my fieldwork.
Right. So Mansi, because you've shared your experiences in these three different types of schools, and then you do talk about different, criteria of ECCE or. But what I'd like to know from you is, because I think this is something that you focus on in your research as well, is the importance of universal and quality ECCE. So when you did or when you carried out your fieldwork in these three types of schools, could you draw some sort of or could you maybe find a uniformity maybe or like a basic common minimum amongst these three types of schools? Or if not, I would like to know from you what you would say define as say probably a universal and quality ECCE. And maybe where do we, like, if I could take the liberty to suggest that maybe this is broadly the situation in India or say Delhi, so then how do we fare when we compare ourselves to say other countries or the situation of the ECCE internationally? So
right, so
talk about that.
Okay, so yes, if I look at, so as I said earlier, if we also look at the literature on quality of ECCE, there is not, it's always acknowledged that there cannot be a universal definition of quality of ECCE because it depends on various factors. A nation's economic development, cultural development, social development, political development, all of these also play a very important role in how far the quality of a particular nation goes. In terms of ECCE or education. So if I can say that there cannot be, conclusion I've also come to is that there cannot be a universal definition of quality of ECCE. But yes, when we look at the various quality standards and norms of various international organizations like World Bank, UNICEF, OECD, and also compare it to the kind of quality standards that we have created in our country. For example, when the National ECCE Policy 2013 was implemented, they also made a guideline for quality standards. So yes, there is commonality, or there are certain kinds of common factors which have been globally recognized as coming under the quality of ECCE indicators. Like I said, that which I also saw, which is also a factor that I've looked into for my field work as well. And for example, first let me just tell you what are the kind of common factors that I could identify when I looked at all of these guidelines and all of these frameworks. Is that a school or a pre-primary educational institute should have, as I said, proper infrastructure, should have a good 1:20 pupil-teacher ratio in the classroom, should have adequate outside space, should have an open space, so that because these children cannot be confined to their classrooms and be formally taught like the senior students, right? So they need to be taken out of the classroom and to be engaged in activities, because this is a time, as I said, where their physical physical, their social, their emotional, their linguistic, every competencies is also growing and increasing, right? So they need to be taken out to the field. So there needs to be open space, and also there needs to be activities, more and more activities conducted for their cognitive development, their psychomotor development, their physical development, even subjects like math, English, language, all of them needs to be taught through playway method. These are the kind of indicators that are also given in these international frameworks that I'm talking about and the national framework, that there needs to be more activity to teach them math, to teach them language. There needs to be a lot of emphasis on these kind of factors, and also some other quality standards that are internationally and both nationally recognized are that there needs to be a community integration. Teachers need to be also, if there's emphasis on how teachers need to be continuously trained and their capacity building should continuously happen, so that they're updated with the most innovative, most new kind of methodologies that they can use in the classroom to teach them. So these are the kind of common quality standards that not universal but common. I would not use universal, but common factors that I saw when I compared the kind of international frameworks that exist and the national frameworks that exist. On quality of ECCA. And when I looked at these factors in the context of my research, in the context of my schools that I visited, yes, there were these factors which were available, which were present in these schools. However, it varied. Like I said, that if I now have to compare, then yes, Sarvodaya schools, which come under the Directorate of Education, they were faring much better in these quality standards. Whereas Anganwadis, if you would say, or MCD, you would say they were much lower in terms of quality standards, these kind of quality standards that I mentioned, if I compare the three. And then because they were lesser, so like through my fieldwork I could also get that link between strategic human resource management and quality indicators. So I could see that where schools really invested a lot in continuous capacity building of teachers, in ensuring that qualified and trained teachers are recruited, in ensuring that proper feedback and evaluation is done of teachers' performance as well, they were faring much better in these quality standards that I mentioned. So here I could also link between, draw the link or bridge between SHRM and quality of early childhood care and education.
Right. One question that I have for you is if you could maybe, tell us maybe what are the challenges, having done your study much in detail, having visited 30 schools. Could you tell us maybe what are the challenges that for SHRM currently in Delhi, or maybe in India, if I could put it like that?
Right. Yes. So I could see a lot of challenges when we talk about SHRM, particularly in the context of early childhood care and education in South Delhi specifically. So the first problem that I saw was that, let's say in MCD schools, right, there were vacancies, but they were not filled. The appointments were not happening for a very long time. There were some schools where since 4 to 5 years, there was no pre-primary teacher. And primary teachers or the principals were teaching these kids who were not trained, and these, because of course they have been recruited from primary classes, so they are not trained, or they do not have that particular training in early childhood care and how to teach these kids, because it's a very different pedagogical style. So that was one issue that I saw in terms of SHRM, that there are vacancies but pre-primary teachers are not recruited very actively, especially in MCD schools. Then the second problem that I saw, again more in MCD schools, were that there was this kind of conflict between the primary and the pre-primary teachers, and also between parents and the pre-primary teacher, because as I said, early childhood care and education requires more activities, requires more playway methods, requires teachers to, students to move around, to participate, to be more active, to have to go to the ground, etc. But these kind of teaching methods are not really taken seriously by the school, not taken seriously by the parents. So a lot of parents complain to the teacher that the child is not, you're not making my child write a lot, which is, in fact, these NEP 2020 also, the latest national education policy, various international organizations, they all argue that there should be no writing in these years. But parents argue that there should be more writing, even for that matter, because in primary they have to write a lot, so sometimes the primary teachers also kind of pressurize the pre-primary teacher that, make them write a little bit. So that's another challenge that I saw that pre-primary teachers faced. Third, that pre-primary teachers were also, of course, lower in majority, like there were hardly two teachers or one teacher in the whole school of pre-primary, so their voices were not really heard, they felt, by the organization. Then at the fourth challenge that I saw, especially, this is now a very important challenge in Anganwadi system, that um, you know very very important challenge that I saw was that in Anganwadi system, these workers who are appointed to also teach these kids have a lot of other responsibilities on them. They are supposed to participate in or they are supposed to go for a lot of surveys. They are supposed to go, in fact, during COVID they were given a lot of COVID survey duties. Now they were given a lot of vaccination survey duties. So their attention was divided between the other kind of, because Anganwadis are not just educational institutes, they are also there for immunization, for pregnant women, for nursing mothers, etc. So their attention is absolutely divided. So these kids are actually at a disadvantage, and also these teachers are at a disadvantage, because in MCD schools or Sarvodaya schools, teachers are only appointed for teaching. Of course, they also have admin work, they also have other work, but here in Anganwadi, the teachers are heavily loaded with other kind of works, like election duties, COVID surveys, taking the kids to for vaccination, etc., etc. So a lot of other work is also given to these Anganwadi teachers, which was a main challenge that I saw there. Another challenge which I saw was that there were complaints, or there were these arguments given by Anganwadi workers that the promotion structures is really very rigid and it's not in their favor, because to become, let's say, from a helper to a worker in an Anganwadi structure, they need to have minimum 10 years of experience and also need to be 35 years of age. But what usually happens is that by the time they complete 10 years of experience, they have crossed the age limit. So even if they are more qualified than what is required, because of these rigid patterns, because of these rigid framework, they are not able to get promotion. So lack of promotion structure and lack of pay. In Anganwadi structure, especially, the pay is very less. So according to them, according to these workers, they feel that the pay is absolutely very less, and nothing in comparison to other pre-primary teachers of schools. Coming to the Sarvodaya Vidyalaya, I would say that in terms of these SHRM practices, they are doing much better than other two categories. But again, these teachers also said that they have the parents want written work. That was a kind of commonality I saw, and again, another issue that was that there was high teacher pupil ratio. As I said, that these international organizations, UNICEF, etc., all of them recommend that there should be 1:20 ratio, and one teacher to 20 students. But there were sometimes classes where it was high as 1:40, or sometimes there was one section where, because they had lack of room, they did not have another extra room, so there were two teachers in KG section with 80 students. So these were the kind of, I think, major challenges that I saw during my fieldwork.
All right, Mansi. So, my final question to you is about your fieldwork. You've done your fieldwork in 30 schools of Delhi. So,
Yes.
could you share a little bit, your experience of doing your fieldwork, as well as the challenges that you encountered?
Right. So, it was a very, very enriching experience. I gained a lot of new knowledge, because also this area, this sector of early childhood care and education, although a lot of work has been done in terms of learning outcomes, or let's say health and nutrition, but not a lot of emphasis has been given from the side of the teachers, or this aspect has not really been looked into. So it was very interesting for me to look at this new kind of knowledge, to gather data on something that, really, on which knowledge really till now doesn't really exist a lot. There's not a lot of work which has been done in this particular area. So it was interesting for me to find out new information, to talk to these teachers and talk to these principals of schools. And it's a new area, it's an exciting area. So I got really interested, and I found some good information and good data which would enrich this whole space of SHRM and quality ECCA. However, yes, there were challenges. First challenge is definitely because of COVID. Entry and access to these schools was a little restricted. So to get permissions, to get access to these schools was a little bit of a struggle, where I had to go to various offices and get those permissions. And also because of COVID, that kind of safety had to be ensured, and in between there were some kind of lockdowns and all of that. So also because of paucity of time, I could only select few schools. I could select 10 from each category. And also, as I said, there are many other service providers in the whole Delhi also. Like, there are NGOs, there are private schools, but because of paucity of time, I could keep my sample size a little smaller, and that's why I could get representation from these three kind of management of ECCA. So these were the major kind of challenges that I felt during my field work. And again, as I said, there's a little, like, according to, in terms of literature review also, there's not a lot of literature which already exists on the on linking these two aspects. So to find that kind of theoretical base was also a little bit of struggle, but there is definitely work which is done separately on these two, so one could form their own opinion and their base. So these were the kind of major challenges that I felt during my field work.
All right, Mansi, thank you so much for talking to us today and sharing your research work as well as your findings with our listeners. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to be a part of the North-South Dialogue podcast, write to us with a brief proposal on your research, as well as a small introduction about yourself. Write to us at nsdialogue@uw.edu. Thank you, everyone. We shall see you in the next podcast.